You have an issue with calling. You ever find yourself on the river, the pot's getting bigger, you know in some distant and rational place in your mind that you need to press that fold button, but you just can't. You call, usually lose, regret it, and the cycle repeats again and again and again. Do you ever wonder where your poker career might be by now if you didn't have this affliction? You're not alone. I try to show you guys which spots are overbluffed and which spots are underbluffed and how to tell the difference. And we're going to try and build confidence in pressing the fold button with conviction in these spots. And that is the first way of fixing this dreadful affliction. The other way is mental game. We'll do a video on that as well at some point, the mental ins and outs of this type of leak. But today, it's all about telling which spots are overbluffed and which spots are underbluffed. Let's review these 9 hands. Let's go. Alright guys, we're going to kick things off with the pocket potatoes here on the button. I'm going to go through these 9 hands which I have not seen before and try to outline where we want to be defending because a spot is overbluffed and when we want to be folding because we think a spot is underbluffed. The key takeaway is that when you're playing low stakes, micro stakes, this student is playing 25NL by the way, your opponents are not going to be making you indifferent on the river. They're not going to be balanced. They're going to have a lot of holes in their strategy and they are going to either be overbluffing or underbluffing as a population in almost all river spots. So we don't really want to roll or mix or say I've got to defend this hand to meet a defense frequency. What we want to do is get into the nitty gritty, the weighing up of the factors, the pros and the cons towards a spot being good to call in or bad to call in. On Queen Jack Deuce then, button versus big blind, we go ahead and check back on the flop. The turn is the Queen of Hearts, so we check again, and we end up on the Ace of Diamonds river facing a near pot-sized lead. This is definitely going to be a spot where we want to go ahead and analyze carefully, because there's a lot of other data points here. So the first one is that this is late position and the base range is wider. The second thing in favor of making a call like this, again, not saying it's right, is that villain is unfiltered, right? We have not at any point bet or raised after the flop and made them condense their range. They have basically arrived on the river with all of the combos of 7-4 suited that they got to the turn with, or probably also landing on the river, you know, when they got to the flop with 6-4 suited, that's landing on the river. King 7 of clubs is probably arriving on this river and has the opportunity to bluff. That said, there are many negative factors in this spot as well. Let's go through what they are. The first is that pot is a horrendous size to actually face. When you face pot, and you'll see this in Grady as well, the bluff frequency that weaker players at lower stakes actually use goes down from half pot. That is backwards, and it's astonishing. But when they bet half pot, they have what we call a bluff tolerance of 25%. That means that because you need to win one time in 4, when they bet half pot, they're only supposed to be bluffing a quarter of the time that they make the bet, but they're bluffing way more than that. Whereas when they pot it, there's a bluff tolerance of 33% bluffs in their range, but they're bluffing less than if they went half pot bluff to value-wise. So pot sizing is kind of a big taboo, especially when you face it from a recreational player. It's going to push you dramatically towards folding. It should anyway in theory, but even more exploitatively. The second data point here that makes this, in my mind, a pretty clear fold is that this is a messy, disgusting, off-putting runout, right? When a card comes that's good for your range, and an ace is relatively good for the button's range here, and it's going to be scary, the whole texture is just going to be scary here to most people at 25NL. This is not a high incentive spot, it's quite a high disgust spot. People are quite revolted by this situation, and they're not that likely to bluff here, even when they land with total air. So even though it's late position, even though villain's range is kind of drowning in terrible hands here to start with, it's actually kind of hard to miss a messy texture, right? So it's actually, there are less air combos in this spot landing on the river than if the board was really dry, like King 6-4-4 deuce or something like that, where, you know, there's just way more air combos. Another thing to say here, a final thing to say, is that many of the hands that actually are air here are things like King 9, King 10, 10-9, 10-8, something with a heart in them, and many of those would have just bluffed the turn, would have just led at us. So this is definitely a fold. I don't like this call, but I can see that there are some factors here that if you take them in isolation, you want to call because it's late position and you didn't filter the opponent. But to summarize, facing the pot size bet on the messy run out is just too terrible that you should fold, even though it's one of these wide range spots. So that one we got wrong. Onwards and upwards. Let's see if we can get some right.